Welcome to the Circa Survivor show for NFL week number 9. This is presented by PoolGenius. My name is Spencer, joined by the lead analyst over at PoolGenius, Jason Lisk. And Jason, we enter week 9 with about 2,000 entries left in Circa Survivor after about 50% got wiped out the week before. So it's getting thinner and thinner as we go. I know the first few weeks we had a very high advancement rate, but it looks like things are starting to normalize here a little bit, and we're getting into sort of that lane where about 50% is eliminated every other week. Of course, last week higher than that. But how do you see this contest right now as we enter week 9?
I've fluctuated on how many winners I'm projecting, but it's always been kind of somewhere between, since the first start of the season, somewhere between like the mid-teens and the mid-20s, and recently in that range of mid-teens to low 20s. I'm going to lower it from the 20 and a half or so that it was last week. I forget the exact number, but it was somewhere in that range because of what happened last week, which was not actually one of the, when you looked at it, like last week had a relatively high advancement odds potential. There are some really risky weeks coming up. Not this week in terms of like the top options, though you're going to get picks concentrated. So there is the risk that we still get a chunk wiped out with one big upset. But just like the overall risk of some of the upcoming weeks is pretty high. And so the other dynamic that happened last week, and I think it's important to think about big picture, how it impacts what's going to happen in the future, is because of who lost. Atlanta and Cincinnati. Those were the two teams that people were flocking to kind of save future value, to save their entries, to preserve better teams for the future. But because those both lost, and because the teams you had to get through with were Indianapolis, Kansas City, teams like that, New England, teams that have value in several weeks coming forward. The Colts maybe not quite as much, but the Colts had value in the past. It had been used a lot. So what happened was now those top teams are even less available. And we actually had a knock-on effect with Detroit. Detroit was 51% available 2 weeks ago. They weren't picked. They were on a bye last week. But because you needed either Detroit or Indy to get through week 5, the other big wipeout week, and because you then needed maybe Indy this week, the combo that's gotten through a lot is the most common combo is week 5 Detroit, week 8 Indy. And now only 30% of the pool has Detroit left, because a lot of the people that used Indy in week 5 probably settled on Atlanta last week or Cincinnati. And half the pool got clipped, and a lot of those had gotten through with Indy. And so that just changes the numbers. And so now those holiday slates with Detroit on them, well, now Detroit's less available, even though they didn't even play last week. Now they're way less available, which means people are going to get more concentrated on riskier picks in the future. So it actually has like a snowball effect. Last week was a big week, I think, in changing the dynamics of this contest.
Yeah, and in your article, Circa Survivor strategy article, which is available to premium PoolGenius members, you had 20 and a half as your over-under for the winners. So you said you're going to lower that probably into the teens or so?
Yeah, well,
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm going to run the numbers, which I like to look at. Like, there's multiple things you need to look at. Not only the average, like win odds in a week, but like the different scenarios and the EV potentials. Because some weeks have high survival, like this week, right? We would expect there to be a lot of survivals, but all it takes is one upset. And so there are plenty of scenarios where only like 65% of the pool, or 50% if the Rams somehow lose as a 2-touchdown favorite, where that's where the pool ends up. So there's a wide range of outcomes. And so you got to kind of account for all those. But yeah, I'll run the numbers. But we're tracking towards some very tough holiday weeks. We are tracking toward, and some concentrated holiday weeks. So yeah, that number's going to go down for sure. And will it get to the low teens? Probably would be my guess. But yeah, that'll all be in the article that'll come out on Thursday. I'll run all those numbers.
Yeah, and I will link that below. I'll pin that in the comment section so you can take a look at that. And you spoke about availability when it comes to the Detroit Lions also, and you can see the availability in Circa Survivor for all the teams in our Circa Survivor data grid available to premium members. And Jason, I believe you're going to pull that up here so we can take a look at it here for week number 9. And as we look at these teams for week 9, we have the Rams as an extremely popular option, 13.5-point favorite. The market gives them 90% win odds over the New Orleans Saints. And then we have the LA Chargers as the second most popular, 26%, and the Green Bay Packers at 33 or 21% projected pick popularity. And all of them are within 80 to 90% win odds. The Packers and the Rams are sort of clustered up there, both 13+ point favorites. And then there's the Chargers, favored by 8.5 on the road against Tennessee. So it really comes down to who you have available. And we mentioned this in week number 6. There was a decision point where you could make between the Green Bay Packers and the LA Rams of who you wanted to use that week and then how it would influence your strategy this week. It just really shows the importance of planning ahead and actually looking at those. Of course, you have to advance every week, but looking ahead really never hurts. And a lot of people picked Green Bay that week. They were 54% picked.
Shockingly more than I expected, to be honest with you. I think I had them projected in the mid-40s. I thought more people would go the Rams than Packers route later, and people went heavily Packers back in week 6.
So their availability, the Packers, that is only 33% heading into this week. So that's going to keep their popularity somewhat low, at least capped. That's why we have it projected around 21%. So I say all this to pose to you the question of, what you did in week number 6 between those teams, Green Bay and the Rams, which a lot of people were on. Did that pretty much make your decision for week number 9 with the variable of the Chargers, where you could pivot off of either of these teams and look towards another heavy favorite?
Yeah, we'll talk about all those, but the die is never cast. You can always reevaluate a decision, right? You get here and maybe you like one. Like, I would say if you save the Packers, you're probably coming in with the assumption I should use the Packers. And I think it's a good play. Like, looking at this board, you're getting the highest EV of the week, right? Which is what we laid out before. That's the entire purpose. I know people say you can't plan for the future, all this stuff. You can't plan perfectly, but I mean, in recent weeks, we've pretty much nailed who's going to be at the top of the board, other than the Jaden Daniels injury with the Chiefs popping up. Unless there's a quarterback injury, we've actually been able to project pretty well who's going to be the biggest favorites in weeks, and that's true this week, and I think going to be true based on look aheads for week 10, another important one we've talked about. But yeah, this one, I mean, you could see Packers Rams were going to be competing for the top win odds, and based on usage, the Rams were going to be really popular. I think I've had them in the mid 40s projected in popularity for several weeks in a row. Especially once they didn't win back in week 5 and they were more available. Like, they are more available to the Packers. And so people are going to flock to them.
Yeah. And so with that, let's look ahead for these teams, because I think it really comes down to, obviously it comes down to who you have available. But the caveat with the Chargers here is looking ahead to that week 13 slate. Who have you already used that would be a very viable play in week 13? You see we have the Chargers, number 1 there with 79% projected win odds against Vegas. Then it's the Rams. Then it's New England. Then it's Seattle. And those are the teams above 70, or Seattle's at 68, I believe. Those are all pretty popular teams that have been used along the way in Circa Survivor and will be used in the Rams this week. So maybe some people want to keep the Chargers in their back pocket for that. It depends on who you've used up to this point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've highlighted week 13, and if you'll notice, the top 2 teams in our projections for the week 13 B slate, which is the non-Thanksgiving part of week 13, are the Chargers and Rams. Chargers against Raiders, Rams at Panthers. And then the next is New England, another team, by the way, that is at least in consideration this week. and then Seattle, a team that's going to call up very soon next week. And so that week 13, people concentrate on like Thanksgiving and Christmas, but that's not an easy week like to think about. You got to think about how you want to do it. I think you could do it either way. You know, back in week 6, we talked about, do you want to be on the popular route that probably has slightly higher win odds, which was take the Packers in 6, the Rams in 9? Or do you want to go a little more contrarian, not completely contrarian because enough people are going to pick them, but do you want to be, you know, Rams when people weren't picking them against the Ravens at the same volume, and then Packers now? Well, you got the same kind of decision here if you have both the Chargers and Rams. Do you stay with the safer route, but the one that's going to be really popular both weeks? I think the Chargers probably project as the most popular pick if these odds hold in week 13B. So basically you're putting yourself with the crowd both times at higher advance odds, or do you go with the reverse? Chargers now, Rams is a little more contrarian and more used up in week 13 and probably protected from getting too popular. Our numbers based on our current projected is I think the EV payoffs are similar. I think the Rams path, Chargers now, Rams in the future probably has more variance. And so let me talk about what I mean by that in the context of a contest with 2,000 people still left. When your EV has more variance, you both have a little more risk of losing, but also more upside to have more of the pool wiped out that are not on your path. And so I think playing it in reverse, Chargers then Rams, gives you more variability that you could be on a path. And if either of those upsets happen to the most popular pick, suddenly, you know, the pool's wiped and you stayed off the popular pick. So that's kind of something to think about. Is I think you can go either way because yes, the Chargers have lower win odds now, and they'll have higher win odds probably in week 13, but you're counteracting that by the much lower popularity combo for the 2 weeks. I think that it's a debate. I think it's a debatable decision.
Yeah, and it's, to me, I think we're spending so much time on these top 3 teams, but I think that's for good reason, right, Jason? Like, these are the premium teams of this slate, and I don't think you really need to go below that. I mean, you can, but if you look below this line in terms of popularity or even in terms of win odds, you're going to need Baltimore. You're going to need Detroit probably. You're going to need Seattle. And I don't like that. We have how many? 5 teams favored by more than a touchdown, and 2 of them at 13 points or greater. Do you really want to go down to a field goal favorite in a week like this and get
Probably
sneaky?
not. No, probably not there. Now, what you could do is decide to mix it up and how you play it. Now, is my projections correct? I mean, this is on almost unheard of low popularity or concentrated popularity at the top 3. I've got 94%. I've only got 2% on Baltimore and New England, and I think Detroit at 1. My Detroit numbers influenced by they're only 30% available. So I think because so many got cut, that makes holding them for those holiday weeks that much more valuable at low ownership relative to the other options. Like they suddenly became a much better pick on those holidays at like half the ownership. Some people may disagree, and we may see a few trickle in on Detroit. But I don't see any of those teams that I've got at 2% getting steamed up like significantly. Maybe I'm off by a couple percent on a team, but they aren't going to eat much. So here's the question: 94% on those teams. How much do you want to be off of all 3? Probably not, because of their high win odds. But we did an exercise before I had you guess it. You nailed it exactly. I said, what do you think the odds are using the market odds that all 3 win? This is for our math people at home. You would multiply the win odds of all 3. The answer is 65%. So there's about a 65% chance that these 3 teams go 3-0, and it's basically a high survival week. But that means there's a 35% chance that one of them does lose in a big upset, right? So that's in play. What's probably less in play is 2 of them losing. The odds of that get down to like 2% or less. And the odds of like all 3 losing is like, we're getting into Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance territory. So I'm not sure it pays to be on like a really risky pick in the hopes that the pool gets wiped out. You may get like one of these teams that gets clipped, right? You're hoping for that if you're off of them. But I don't know that you want to be off all three of them, like for the most part.
Well, and then to my point of, okay, let's say you're off of these three because you're trying to preserve future value. It's hard to do that this week. I mean, maybe then you're looking all the way down. Those teams I mentioned are you're not preserving any. You're going Jacksonville, Dallas, basically.
The line moves up. You're going Chicago.
You know what? I think that's worth a mention here because we are recording this on Wednesday afternoon, and as we're recording it, Chicago's a 2.5-point favorite, but Joe Flacco is questionable. Flacco's ruled out. Chicago could move a little bit above a field goal favorite on the road at Cincinnati. Do you think people will try to sneak them through then? Let's just say they move to like a 4.5-point favorite or something.
Okay. Yeah. We can hypothetical.
What would you do? Would you even entertain Chicago, or would you say, that's nice, I'm still looking at these top three?
I think you could entertain it because I think you could entertain New England, right? Let's set the bar at New England. Like they're a 5.5-point favorite. If you look on that EV numbers, they're coming in right around 1, which means a neutral EV, which is actually a good play. And the reason it's neutral is because, yeah, they have more risk, but there is also that potential that you benefit from one of those three getting upset and you don't have to pick which one. You're kind of benefiting that there's a 35% chance one of them loses and over 20% of the pool goes out. And so New England is a solid EV play. Now they have more future value. So where would Chicago have to be to make them at least a solid consideration? I mean, the Rams have a negative EV at this high projected number. Chargers are slightly negative as well. Anything under 1 would be what we consider negative, right? Almost neutral. If the Bears were at like 0.95, 0.96 EV at their lower future value, I think they're in play as a true contrarian pick to save all those teams because they do all have spots you could use them. And you're going to have to take risks somewhere in this contest. That's at least where I think it's a calculated positive risk to save future value. But yeah, right now there aren't those teams. Like the team to save future value is the Chargers, right? Of the options, and they still have useful spots. So we don't really have like a case like last week, Atlanta and Cincinnati. We don't have like Dallas in week 2, that kind of thing here on this slate yet. But like you said, if Chicago's line moves, I think if it gets to 4.5 to 5, I think they become in play.
And yeah, it's so interesting because Chicago really doesn't have that future value. Maybe week 15 versus Cleveland, we have 68% projected win odds right now.
I'll tell you where some of their future value comes up is Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
As a contrarian, yeah.
As a true outright underdog, because we project Philadelphia to be super popular. So, like, I don't think many people are going to have the stones to pick the Bears, but they're probably going to have a better EV than actually picking the Eagles if the Eagles are close to 40 to 50% picked. So anyway, Chicago's EVs, a lot of it's in that Thanksgiving week. So if you're like ruling that out, like you're like, that's crazy, I would never consider it, then they become even lower future value.
Yeah, in on the contrast, New England, like we threw out with the other example of where you can go contrarian, week 11, they have the highest win odds, which is just 2 weeks away. And then they have other playable spots where they aren't necessarily number 1, but they would be a useful contrarian as well, kind of like they are this week. And maybe those weeks you don't have 13, 14-point favorites. Like we just don't know.
I'm probably leaning away from using them, but I can make the case for it. Like with these numbers, I can make the case because I do think they're going to be at low ownership, get some high EV spots late in the year. And in week 11, they'll have high win odds. But if you're the type that likes to stay off the popular pick, maybe you don't want to consider week 11 and fall on a different option. But yeah, New England's in play. They're kind of like where right now I would put like the win odds dividing line of what you should consider is probably New England.
Yeah.
Baltimore, Detroit, New England, if you're willing to use up those teams, but they have high future value.
Right. Yeah. So do you have anything else you want to add to this Circa Survivor slate as it revolves around those teams that you are considering above that line?
No, I mean, we've seen line movement down the Chargers. I do think there's some risk of the Chargers. Like, I'm looking at my numbers. There's at least the possibility Green Bay comes in below that because they're, like we said, they're capped.
Yep.
I think they're the best play, and I think the majority of people that have them should consider them. If you want to fall back on the Chargers, though, I get it. I do think there's at least some risk the Chargers go up in popularity, despite the line movement going down. I think because they are that one case of like, oh, this team doesn't have as much future value. This team is mostly available. They're 97% available. Like, because the only other week they were really used was the Giants loss. So entries didn't get through with them. And so that would be the one where I could see people going higher than my 26%. Other than that, I don't see the numbers changing unless we see that Chicago line movement that would maybe pull a few picks there.
Real quick, what do you make of that Tennessee Chargers line movement? Like, is that a little bit surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, we want to watch. Well, Chargers have some cluster injuries in the secondary, though that's not like surprising. Maybe there's something behind the scenes that we're going to find out about, right, on an injury report, because that sometimes happens. We see line movement today and we find out why. But they definitely have some cluster injuries in the secondary. Derwin James, lots of safeties have been hurt, and so yeah, there are causes from there. We'll see, but yeah, anytime you've seen line movement between 8.5 to 10, I would, if it continues to go down, that would really concern me. Because those are kind of in that teaser range, like where you can also see numbers massaged by sports books for teaser reasons. So I think if you see a drop below 8.5, which would be moving away from where the teaser tendencies would push it, because you could tease it down to 2.5, I would be more concerned if I saw that line movement, and if we hear about injuries that could be impacting that.
By the way, we have an NFL picks video that we put out, and we gave our favorite teaser pick of the week, and I definitely took the Chargers. Teased down from -8.5 to -2.5. I think that's a smash spot for them if you are in the teasing mood this week. So before we get out of here, I want to get your thoughts on Circa Grandissimo, which is down to 13 entries. We had 2 eliminated last week. How do you see this shaping up for not only Grandissimo, but also, people can kind of use this as a guide if you're in some smaller pools, maybe some home league pools, or over on Splash Sports, things like that. What are your thoughts for those smaller slates?
Yeah, well, we talked about the week 6 versus 9 dynamic, and it played out at an extreme in this Grandissimo pool, right? Back in week 6, I forget the exact numbers that were live, but it was something like 13 out of 15 or 13 out of 16 went on the Packers at the time, which was a huge number. Like the type of number where you'd want to be off of. And the reason you want to be off of them, because now there's only 2 Green Bay pickers that have them available. Man, if I can be solo or with one other person on Green Bay, and I believe the number is like 10 can take the Rams out of 13. Now, one of those can take either Green Bay or the Rams, I believe. I might be getting it wrong there, so I apologize if you check it. But yeah, the numbers are going to come in heavily Rams, just like they were heavily Packers. Well, to win these contests, these are the kind of weeks where, is it probably going to happen? No. But if I can be almost solo on a team that has similar odds to the one everybody's on, I like my chances. I like my chances of paying. Some of those people may decide to go Chargers. I don't think it's a terrible idea in this contest, because I feel like what we've seen recently is everybody goes heavy on the biggest favorite, reducing that favorite's value and providing you value. If you have the Rams after this, you may be the only one or two that have them left for week 13. And this contest probably getting there, honestly, unless the Rams lose, it's probably getting there. So my thought with this week would be use the Packers if you got them. Try to consider whether you want to use Chargers or Rams. I don't know that anybody's going to go below that, honestly, in this contest, for the reasons we laid out. I'm in a small pool where I used the Rams back in week 6, and now I'm coming back with the Packers. And I know that I'm probably catching well over half the pool opposite me, and I'm willing to use the Packers up in this spot. So, and then week 10, we can talk about that a little bit in Grandissimo just to preview it. Only 4 have Denver available. 5 have Buffalo, but one of those also has Denver, so they're probably, let's say, 4-4. Well, there's 13. That leaves 5 people that are picking somebody besides Denver and Buffalo, the 2 biggest favorites next week. We have look-ahead lines. Denver -10, Buffalo -8. Nobody else over a touchdown. So next week's going to be a very interesting one in Grandissimo. And we've been talking about that for weeks, how you set that up. And if you've planned ahead and saved Denver or Buffalo for week 10, who knows how it's going to work out, but you set yourself up in a good position.
Yeah, and it's wild just looking at this week 10 line. We were talking about it before we got on the air. Heck, we've been talking about this. I remember you and I at Circa Sportsbook before the season, previewing the season and saying, man, that week 10 slate is something. And it turns out all the biggest favorites projected for next week are also not the most available. Like, they've been used at some point throughout the season. You have Denver, Buffalo, the Colts, the Seattle Seahawks. Then you even throw the Chargers in there as a maybe. We'll see how it shakes out, and we'll be here to break it down next week. But man, this week has plenty of options and plenty of top heavy options. So enjoy that this week, because next week's going to be something special.
Yeah, we're starting to get into the part where the people that say don't plan, just pick winners are about to pay the piper.
Yeah, they're going to come up against it in week 10 probably. Yeah. Because if you pick basically the biggest favorites from week 1 on,
the picks, you're
kind of, I don't want to say you're SOL in week 10, but you got some stuff to figure out for sure.
You're going to need that Carolina over New Orleans or some pick like that to get you through, honestly.
Yeah. Probably. So we will break that down next week. But if you're looking for more Circa Survivor week 9 breakdowns, check out Jason's article. I will link that below and pin that in the comment section. Of course, you can also check out our Circa Survivor data grid and all of our tools that down in the description below. I will link those as well. And from Jason and myself and everyone over here at PoolGenius, good luck with your Circa Survivor Week 9 picks.